My grandfather had saved up $45,000 to join our family vacation to Europe. For years he had denied himself simple pleasures, all to experience one final grand journey with us. But the moment we reached the airport, everything unraveled. We were waiting near the boarding gate when my mother turned to him and declared, "Dad, I forgot your ticket. You'll have to return home." Her tone was cold and unapologetic, as if she felt no shame in saying it aloud. My grandfather's face drained of color. He pulled out the envelope containing all his receipts, his hands trembling. "Clara, I gave you the money," he said. "You assured me everything was handled." My mother crossed her arms and murmured, "You'll only slow us down. Just go back. We'll tell everyone you weren't feeling well." My father remained silent, while my sister rolled her eyes and complained, "We're going to miss our flight." In that instant, I understood this wasn't a mistake. They had planned it. They intended to leave him behind. I looked at my grandfather. His eyes were filled with tears, not from anger, but from the kind of sorrow that only comes from a lifetime of putting family first. I couldn't let him leave in shame and solitude. So, as the rest of my family headed toward the gate, I grabbed his bag and declared, "I'm staying with you." Everyone froze and stared. My mother's expression twisted in disbelief, but I didn't care. I walked out of that airport beside my grandfather, unaware that this single decision would alter everything. 4 weeks later, when my family returned from Europe, they were stunned to discover who I had married in their absence. Before that day at the airport, our family had seemed perfect to outsiders. We were the kind of family neighbors admired. My mother, Clara, loved organizing elaborate trips and dinners that made us appear polished and united. My father, Victor, worked long hours but always ensured we had the finest things. My younger sister, Maya, was excited about graduating high school and already planning the Instagram photos she wanted to capture in Paris. And then there was my grandfather, Harold. At 72, he moved a little slower, but his energy never faded when it came to his family. If you asked anyone in town about him, they'd tell you he was the kindest man they knew. He was the type who kept extra sandwiches in his truck in case he encountered someone hungry on the road. He never missed a birthday, and his hugs made you feel invincible. He was the one who taught me to ride a bike without training wheels, standing in the driveway for hours, encouraging me with his deep, steady voice. "You've got this, Evan. Believe in yourself." When my mother announced our family was planning a month-long trip across Europe, Italy, France, Germany, Spain, it sounded like a dream. She talked endlessly about luxury hotels, private tours, and how this would be the experience of a lifetime. My grandfather's eyes lit up in a way I'd never seen before. He had spent most of his life working in construction and had never left the country. The farthest he'd ever traveled was to Florida for a wedding in his 40s. For him, this was a chance to finally see the world he'd only read about in books or seen in films. The issue was money. The trip was expensive, and while my parents could afford their share, my grandfather would need to cover his own costs. I remember him sitting at the kitchen table with a calculator, reviewing the numbers repeatedly. He had a modest pension, some savings, and a small plot of land outside town. Finally, he made a decision. He sold part of that land he had tended to his whole life just to afford this trip. When he handed the check to my mother, his hand shook, but his smile was wide. "Clara," he said, "I want to come with you. This is my dream. Thank you for including me." I could see the tension in my mother's smile. She replied, "Of course, Dad. It'll be wonderful to have you with us." But the way she avoided his gaze told me something wasn't right. My father stayed quiet as always, his lips pressed tightly together. At the time, I thought maybe they were just concerned about how he'd handle the long flights and busy schedules. I had no idea their intentions were far crueler. In the weeks leading up to the trip, my grandfather was like a child again. He bought guidebooks for every country on the itinerary and read facts aloud during dinner. Evan, did you know the Eiffel Tower was once considered an eyesore? Or, Maya, there's a gelato shop in Florence that's been open for 300 years. We have to visit it. He even practiced phrases in different languages, sitting in his recliner, repeating buongiorno, bonjour, and guten tag. I teased him about his accent, and he laughed, saying he was going to charm everyone in Europe. The night before the trip, he came to my room holding an old leather journal. I'm going to write everything down, Evan, he said. Every meal, every sight, every laugh. I want to remember this forever. He placed the journal on my desk and smiled. But most of all, I'm glad you'll be there with me. Trips come and go, but sharing it with you will mean the most. I hugged him tightly, promising that this would be the best month of our lives. The next morning at the airport, we gathered with our luggage and passports. My grandfather wore his finest shirt, the one he saved for special occasions, tucked into pressed pants. He had polished his shoes the night before and even wore the wristwatch his late wife had given him decades ago on their anniversary. He stood there proudly, as if he belonged exactly where he was. From the outside, everything seemed fine. My mother checked the tickets and passports. My father ensured the bags were weighed correctly, and my sister was already taking selfies by the large airport windows. But I noticed something odd. My mother barely spoke to my grandfather. She responded to him with short, impatient replies as if his excitement annoyed her. Yes, Dad, we'll see the Colosseum. Yes, Dad, I know you want to take pictures. She acted as though every word from him was a burden. My grandfather, however, either didn't notice or chose to ignore it. He kept smiling, patting my shoulder, and pointing out planes as they moved along the runway. Can you believe we'll be on one of those soon? He asked, his eyes shining. For him, the world was finally opening up. For me, it felt like something was closing in, though I couldn't explain why. Looking back, I realize now that all his hope, all his trust, was built on a foundation that was already cracked. He believed we were a family who wanted him there. He believed my mother had arranged everything honestly. He believed that after all his sacrifices, he finally deserved this. I wanted to believe it too. I had no idea that within an hour, standing at that same airport, his dream would be shattered by the very people he loved most. The announcement for boarding echoed through the terminal, and everyone around us began lining up. Families gathered their children, couples held hands, and groups of tourists moved toward the gate with excitement in the air. My grandfather clutched his carry-on tighter, his smile as bright as a child's on Christmas morning. He glanced at Emmy and said, "This is it, Evan. I can finally check this off my bucket list." His voice cracked with emotion, and I could feel how much this moment meant to him. But as we approached the gate, my mother suddenly stopped. She turned to my grandfather with a look that was cold and unyielding. "Dad," she said, her tone sharp and final, "I forgot your ticket. You'll have to go home." At first, I thought I had misheard her. My grandfather blinked in confusion, his mouth slightly open, waiting for her to laugh or correct herself. When she didn't, his hand trembled as he reached into his pocket and pulled out the envelope where he'd kept his paperwork. He held it out, saying, "No, Clara, that's not possible. I gave you the money. I kept every receipt. Here, look." His voice was breaking, desperate. But she didn't even reach for the envelope. Instead, she crossed her arms and lowered her voice so only we could hear. "You're not coming. You'll slow us down, and I can't drag you through airports and trains for 4 weeks. Just go home. We'll tell people you weren't feeling well." I felt my chest tighten. The way she said it, calm, rehearsed, without hesitation, told me this was no accident. This had been her plan all along. My father stood silently beside her, his jaw clenched, eyes fixed on the floor. My sister Maya groaned in frustration, muttering, "We're going to miss the flight. Just let him go home." My grandfather's face crumpled as though her words had struck him physically. He looked at my father for support, whispering, "Victor, say something. I sold my land. I trusted you both." But my father remained silent, avoiding his gaze. It was as if the man who had married my mother had vanished, replaced by a shadow too afraid to speak. "Dad," my mother continued, her voice sharp, "stop making a scene. You'll be fine here. You don't belong on a trip like this." I could hardly process what I was hearing. This was the man who had raised her, who had worked his whole life to give her opportunities. This was the man who had spent every dollar he had left to share this trip with us. And here she was, discarding him like an inconvenience. My grandfather's hand shook so violently that the envelope slipped to the floor. He bent down slowly, his knees creaking, and picked it up with as much dignity as he could muster. When he stood back up, his eyes glistened with tears. "Clara," he whispered, his voice raw and broken, "I only wanted to be with my family. That's all I wanted." The sight of him standing there, humiliated in the middle of the airport, while families bustled happily around us, sent a surge of anger through me. I looked at my mother, then at my father, waiting for one of them to come to their senses. But their faces were like stone. They had already made their decision. Something inside me snapped. I couldn't let him walk out of that airport alone. I couldn't let him be cast aside as if his love and sacrifice meant nothing. I turned to my mother and said firmly, "If Grandpa isn't going, then I'm not going either." Her eyes widened, her lips curling in disbelief. "Evan, don't be ridiculous," she snapped. "You've been waiting for this trip as much as anyone. Don't throw it away over a stubborn old man." "He's not just an old man," I shot back. "He's my grandfather. He's the one person who's never let me down." Maya groaned louder this time. "You're seriously going to ruin this for all of us?" "Fine, stay behind if you want. Just don't expect us to wait for you." I picked up my grandfather's bag from beside his feet and slung it over my shoulder. "Come on, Grandpa. We're leaving." He looked at me, stunned, his mouth open to protest, but I squeezed his arm. "I'm not letting you go home alone," I whispered. His eyes filled with tears again, but this time there was gratitude mixed with the heartbreak. My mother's voice cut through the air, sharp enough to draw stares from nearby passengers. "Evan, if you walk away right now, don't expect any sympathy when you regret it." I didn't even turn back. I walked forward, pulling my grandfather gently beside me. He shuffled along, still dazed, still heartbroken, but no longer abandoned. Behind us, my family joined the boarding line without another word. As we stepped out of the terminal and back into the open air, my grandfather exhaled shakily, his shoulders slumped under the weight of what had just happened. "Evan," he said quietly, "you didn't have to do that. You've been looking forward to this trip for months." I shook my head. "I don't care about Europe, Grandpa. I care about you. I couldn't stand by and watch them humiliate you like that. You've always been there for me, and now I'm here for you." For a long moment, he just looked at me. His shoulders, which had been hunched with shame minutes earlier, straightened slightly. He nodded, and a small flicker of relief crossed his face. "Thank you, Evan. I don't know what I did to deserve you, but thank you." We went back to his house that day, both of us exhausted. His old recliner creaked as he sank into it, and I sat across from him. The silence in the room felt different than before. It wasn't heavy with humiliation anymore. It was filled with a quiet resolve, the kind that settles in after you make a choice you know you can't undo. The following days were awkward at first. My phone buzzed with messages from Maya, short and dismissive. "You're crazy. You'll regret this. We're in Rome, and it's amazing." My mother didn't text at all. My father sent a single message. "We'll talk when we get back." I deleted it without replying. My grandfather tried to go about his usual routines, watering the garden, reading the newspaper, making coffee, but I could see the sadness still lingering. I wanted to pull him out of it. One morning I said, "Grandpa, let's do something different today. We don't need Europe to make memories. Let's create our own adventure right here." He chuckled, shaking his head. "What kind of adventure can two people have in a small town?" "You'd be surprised," I said, grabbing his keys. "Come on, trust me." That day, we drove to a nearby lake he had always loved but rarely visited. We rented a small rowboat and spent the afternoon drifting on the water. My grandfather's laughter echoed across the lake when I nearly tipped us over trying to reel in a fish. He leaned back, the sun warming his face, and for the first time since the airport, he looked peaceful. Over the next 2 weeks, we found joy in places we had overlooked before. We explored little diners on the edge of town, tried foods neither of us had eaten before, and even went to a local cultural festival where the streets were filled with music, dancing, and handmade crafts. My grandfather carried his old leather journal everywhere, writing down every detail. One evening, while we sat on a park bench eating kettle corn, he showed me a page. "I thought I needed Europe to fill this journal," he said. "Turns out I just needed the right company." That night at the festival was when everything changed. My grandfather noticed a booth for a local charity that helped elderly veterans and their families. He stopped to chat with the volunteers, his natural kindness drawing them in. That was where I met Elena. She was 26, with bright brown eyes and a smile that could calm a storm. She was handing out pamphlets, her hands busy but her voice warm as she explained the organization's work. I offered to help her carry a box of supplies to the back, and we struck up a conversation. She told me about her passion for helping others, how her own grandfather had inspired her to give back. There was something about her that felt genuine in a way I hadn't experienced before. My grandfather, always quick to notice, pulled me aside after we left. "She's special," he said, raising his eyebrows knowingly. I laughed it off, but deep down I knew he was right. Over the next few days I kept finding reasons to see her again. We met for coffee, then lunch, then an evening walk by the river. Every time she asked about my grandfather, and every time she insisted on joining us for the little adventures we had started creating. With Elena around, my grandfather seemed more alive than ever. He joked with her, shared stories about his younger years, and even taught her how to bait a fishing hook when we went back to the lake. She listened to him with respect and affection, something my mother had never shown him. Watching them bond made me realize how different life could be when surrounded by people who actually cared. By the third week, I knew my connection with Elena was more than just a passing spark. We talked late into the night about our values, our dreams, and what family meant to us. She understood me in a way no one else had, and she accepted my grandfather as part of the package without hesitation. One evening, while my grandfather sat on the porch watching the sunset, Elena and I sat beside him. I took her hand, feeling the weight of the decision forming inside me. I glanced at my grandfather, and he gave me a small, knowing nod, as if he could read my thoughts before I even spoke. The humiliation at the airport had been the worst moment of his life, but standing by him had opened a door I never expected. While my family was chasing landmarks across Europe, I was building something real at home. A choice that began out of loyalty to my grandfather was about to change the course of my entire future. The 4 weeks passed faster than I ever thought they could. While my family posted photos of Parisian cafes and Rome's ancient ruins, I spent my days with my grandfather and Elena. We cooked meals together, visited places I had overlooked. in my own hometown and built bonds that felt deeper than anything a vacation could give me. By the final week, Elena and I knew we wanted to spend our lives together. It was sudden, yes, but every day with her had stripped away doubt and replaced it with certainty. My grandfather, grinning like a proud father, stood as my best man when Elena and I exchanged vows in a simple ceremony at the courthouse. There were no fancy decorations or exotic backdrops, but it was real, and it was ours. The day my family was due to return. My grandfather and I sat on the porch together. He leaned back in his chair, a quiet confidence about him. "They'll be here soon," he said. "Are you ready for this?" I tightened my grip on Elena's hand, more than ever. When the taxi pulled up, my mother was the first to step out. She wore designer sunglasses, her suitcase rolling neatly behind her. My father followed, carrying extra bags, and my sister hopped out last, phone in hand, snapping a quick picture of the house she hadn't seen in a month. They looked sunburned and satisfied, glowing with the pride of having seen the world. My mother spotted me on the porch and smirked. "So, how was your little staycation, Evan? I hope you enjoyed babysitting." Her eyes flicked to my grandfather, and the disdain in her tone was sharp enough to sting. "You didn't miss much. Europe was incredible, and I can't imagine dragging an old man through all of that. You should thank me." Her words rolled off me like rain against stone. I rose slowly, pulling Elena to her feet beside me. My mother's smirk faltered when she noticed her, then turned into suspicion. "Who's this?" I took a deep breath and spoke clearly. "This is my wife, Elena. We got married while you were gone." The words hit like a thunderclap. My mother's mouth opened, but no sound came out. She staggered back a step, her suitcase slipping from her grip. My sister gasped so loudly it drew a stare from the taxi driver. My father froze, his eyes widening as though he had seen a ghost. My grandfather stood proudly beside me, his arm around my shoulder. "I was his best man," he announced with a smile that radiated dignity. My mother found her voice at last, and it came out sharp and trembling. "You did what? Married her? You barely know this girl. Do you have any idea how reckless that is?" Elena stepped forward, calm and steady. "I may not know you well, Mrs. Marino, but I know Evan. I know the way he treats people, the respect he shows his grandfather, and the values he lives by. That tells me everything I need to know about the kind of man he is." Maya shook her head, staring at me like I had lost my mind. "You seriously married some random girl while we were in Europe? Are you insane?" I held Elena's hand tighter and raised my voice so none of them could mistake my resolve. "While you were off pretending to be a perfect family for photos, Grandpa and I were building a real life here. Elena has shown me more kindness in 4 weeks than I have ever seen from you, Mom, and she respects Grandpa, which is more than I can say for the rest of you." My father finally spoke, his voice low and heavy. "Evan, this is a lot to process. Marriage is serious. You should have waited for us to come back." I turned to him, anger simmering beneath my calm words. "Waited? The same way you waited at the airport while Mom humiliated Grandpa? The same way you stayed silent when she told him to go home like he was worthless? You don't get to lecture me about what's serious. You abandoned your own father-in-law to protect your wife's pride. I won't live like that." Clara's face twisted, her voice rising. "This is betrayal. You embarrassed us. You think marrying her makes you noble? It makes you a fool." My grandfather stepped forward then, his voice booming with a strength I hadn't heard in years. "No, Clara. The only embarrassment here is the way you treated your own father. I sold my land. I gave you everything I had left. And you tried to leave me behind like trash. Evan is the only one who stood by me. He gave me dignity when you tried to take it away. That's not foolishness. That's love." The yard fell silent. My mother's face burned red, her lips trembling with words she couldn't form. My sister turned away, shame flickering across her expression for the first time. My father lowered his head, unable to meet my grandfather's eyes. I took a step closer to them, my voice steady. I didn't lose anything by missing Europe. I gained everything I actually needed. A wife who loves me. A bond with my grandfather stronger than ever. And the strength to stand up for what's right. Elena's hand slipped into mine again, her eyes soft but unyielding. My grandfather placed his hand on my shoulder with pride radiating from him. Together we stood as a new family, one that valued loyalty and respect over appearances and selfish pride. My mother muttered something under her breath, then yanked her suitcase upright with a jerky motion. "Fine, do what you want, but don't expect me to celebrate this disaster." She stormed inside, my sister trailing behind. My father lingered at the door, his eyes meeting mine with regret before he followed them. My grandfather sighed deeply, then smiled at me. "You did it, Evan. You stood your ground. Your grandmother would be proud." As Elena and I stood there with him, I realized that this moment, the confrontation, the shock, the truth finally laid bare, wasn't just about exposing my family's cruelty. It was about reclaiming the meaning of family itself. For the first time, I felt free. The house felt different after that day. The air no longer carried the same weight of control my mother used to hold over every room. For the first time, I wasn't afraid to stand in my own home and say what I believed. My decision to stay with my grandfather and marry Elena had drawn a line none of us could ignore. In the days that followed, my mother barely spoke to me. When she did, her words were sharp and cold. She acted as if my marriage was a stain on the family's reputation. She refused to acknowledge Elena and treated my grandfather as though he no longer existed. She strutted around with the same self-importance, but I could see cracks forming in her control. My sister Maya stayed glued to her phone. At first, she mocked me, telling her friends how I'd ruined my life by marrying a woman after only a few weeks, but there were moments when I caught her staring at my grandfather, and her eyes softened with something close to guilt. She never apologized, but the silence replaced the snide remarks. That was progress in its own way. My father was the most complicated. He had been silent at the airport and silent when my mother abandoned my grandfather. But after we returned from the courthouse, he began to linger in the evenings instead of hiding in his study. One night, he came out onto the porch where my grandfather and I were sitting. He looked at my grandfather for a long time, then said quietly, "I should have stood up for you. I didn't, and I regret it." My grandfather leaned back in his chair and nodded. "It's not too late to be better, Victor. You still have time." Hearing those words from my grandfather made me realize something important. He wasn't holding on to bitterness. Even after everything my mother had done, even after being humiliated in front of strangers, he was willing to forgive if someone showed genuine remorse. That strength, that grace, was something I knew I wanted to carry with me for the rest of my life. Life with Elena became a steady rhythm of simple joys. We cooked meals together in the kitchen, laughed over board games with my grandfather, and spent weekends exploring the parts of our town that most people ignored. She treated my grandfather like family from the start, asking about his stories, driving him to the lake when he felt restless, and even helping him keep up with his journal. She never saw him as a burden. She saw him the way I did, as a man who had given everything for the people he loved. My grandfather began to smile more. He started each day with a light in his eyes, excited to write another page in his journal. He no longer looked like a man weighed down by rejection. He looked like someone who had been restored, given back the dignity that had been stolen from him. The greatest change, however, came from within me. Standing by my grandfather at the airport had been a decision made in anger and instinct, But living with the consequences showed me the power of loyalty. I had given up the chance to see Europe, but in exchange, I had gained a marriage, a renewed bond with my grandfather, and a clear understanding of what family truly means. I also began to see my mother differently. For years, I had excused her sharp words and controlling behavior as stress or personality. But after what happened, I realized that some people put appearances above people, and no matter how much you try, you cannot change them unless they want to change themselves. She may never understand why I chose my grandfather that day, but I no longer needed her approval. What mattered was the life we were building in the aftermath. My grandfather had found joy again. I had found love. Together, we had created something stronger than the false image my mother had been chasing across Europe. As the weeks turned into months, people in our town began to notice the shift. Neighbors who had heard whispers about the airport incident came by with quiet words of support. Some shook my grandfather's hand and told him he deserved better. Others congratulated me and Elena, saying our courage to stand by each other had inspired them. The truth was spreading, and it wasn't the story my mother wanted the world to hear, but that no longer mattered. We weren't living for her approval. We were living for ourselves. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in gold and pink, my grandfather sat with Elena and me on the porch. He looked at us with a proud smile and said, "Family isn't about blood. It's about who shows up when it matters. You both showed up for me, and I'll never forget it." That moment stayed with me. Family is not defined by who shares your last name, but by who is willing to sacrifice to stand beside you when the world turns its back. I thought missing Europe would be the greatest loss of my life. Instead, it was the beginning of everything I actually needed, a marriage rooted in respect and love, a bond with my grandfather that grew stronger every day, and the freedom to live honestly without pretending for the sake of appearances. Looking back, I don't regret a single choice. If I had to do it all over again, I would still pick up my grandfather's bag at the airport and walk away with him. Because in that moment, I wasn't just saving him from humiliation. I was saving myself from a life where loyalty meant nothing. My grandfather spent $45,000 hoping to buy a trip with his family. He never got that trip, but he gained something priceless. The knowledge that at least one person would never abandon him. And in the process, I gained a life I never could have imagined, one built on love, loyalty, and the kind of family that can never be broken. That day at the airport changed my life forever. I thought I was losing an adventure, but instead, gained a family that truly valued love and respect. My grandfather found his dignity again. I found a partner who shares my values, and together, we built something far more meaningful than any trip across Europe could have given us.